So I'm here with Deb Schwartzkopf, and we are talking about her career as a studio potter. She is based in Seattle, Washington. So Deb and I actually have a personal connection. Deb is a good friend of my brother's. My brother is also a potter, and they've known each other you guys have known each other for a long time.
20 years or something. Yeah, crazy.
So let's start at the beginning, because I love hearing about people's childhoods and kind of if there were any clues as to if this was their calling early on. So you were born in Seattle, you grew up in Seattle, and then you did maybe a pottery class in high school. Or where were some clues that you liked pottery or that you liked art early on?
Yeah. Well, my first ceramics class was in high school in Washington. There's a program called Running Start, and you can take college classes in lieu of high school classes. I mean, it's sort of trying to help kids get on a college track, essentially. And that was important. But I think a lot of the desire to make things came from my family. My mom taught me how to sew when I was really young. My dad makes cabinets or has made cabinets, and now, well, I guess he just is retiring, but he used to make the CAD drawings. And I just grew up in a family of people who made things.
Yeah.
And especially my grandmother really loved to cook, and it was how she showed affection. And so adding that into ceramics really felt natural.
Yeah. And your grandmother, she was one of your role models, right?
Yeah, my mother's mother immigrated from Romania with her husband and actually my mother's two older sisters. And she is a role model for me. All my grandparents are, but I got to know her probably the best of my grandparents. And she just really made family important, and she worked really hard to help their dreams come into being, by providing opportunities in different ways, from piano lessons to swimming lessons. And also she was an avid gardener, and I got a lot of love of all of those things from her.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear about your garden and your bees a little bit later in our interview. So then you went on to college, but you went to Alaska, right?
I did. I think like many late teen, 18, 19-year-olds are sort of seeking an adventure, maybe wanting to leave behind some of the voices that are telling you how to be and how to live. And I wanted a chance to redefine myself. And I had a really long time childhood friend who went and worked in Alaska, and she just told me how I would love it. And I don't know, she inspired me. And another friend also moved up there. And from Seattle, it's not as dramatic, as from New York.
Right.
But it was still dramatic. It was my first time living out of state. And I moved there on my own. Of course, with the support of my family. But it was a big deal. And I went there mostly because I wanted more space and mountains. And in my family, it's always been put forward that education is how you move forward in life. So, of course, I just enrolled in college and ended up getting a ceramics degree there. I liked ceramics when I took it in high school at Highline Community College and had a great teacher. But I didn't have that immediate, I want to do this the rest of my life experience. It took me a while. I was a major of the month kind of undergraduate student. My poor mom had so many talks with me about, okay, sure, you can be a linguist. Okay, sure, you could be a botanist. Okay, sure, you could be a writer. I mean, I just tried on everything in my head, and finally art felt like it encompassed all of those things in some way.
I love that so much.
The pottery that I made in Alaska really, I don't think looks much like what I make now. I was definitely in the beginning phases. But yeah, I like to draw on a lot of different inspirations for my work, and the environment is one of them. And the Alaskan environment is phenomenal. I mean, if you ever want to go somewhere that makes you feel small and kind of puts into perspective that compared to the mountains and, I don't know, the vastness of the land, that's a really good place to go.
Wow. Okay. It's on my list post.
Yeah. Have you ever been there?
I have not. I have not. But I would love to go. Yeah. Nature is a huge inspiration for me in my creative process. So from Alaska, you went to San Diego, right?
I did. I finished my undergraduate degree. I got a BA with an emphasis in ceramics, and I also did a bunch of small metals and sculpture. And my professors were pretty keen on getting people who went through the program on a track of doing a post-bac type program and going to grad school and then going on to residencies, which is sort of exactly what I did. And I felt like one of my weakest areas was glazing. I hadn't really developed a palette of my own. I still was using a lot of shop glazes that were available to students just through the university, which is fine, it's normal. But I wanted to learn how to do that more. And I went to San Diego and worked for 1 year at San Diego State University with Richard Burkett and Joanne Hayakawa. And Richard is one of the reasons I moved there, and he's really good at glaze chemistry. And so I studied that with him. So I did that for a year and also worked on an application for graduate school during that year. It was pretty shocking moving from Alaska to San Diego.
Yeah. Like
I had a hard time with it, to be honest. I mean, I love both of those places, but it's like moving from a village to a freeway system. It's a little shocking, but really inspiring also.
That's great.
Yeah, so when I was in San Diego, the flowers and the gardening and the plants that you can grow are just unbelievably more magnified than Alaska. So that was a huge bonus, like crazy bamboo and tropical everything and hummingbirds, and I don't know, it's just really great.
That's awesome. Okay. And that kind of reminds me of, I lived in South America in Chile and then moved to like Manhattan. And
that seems way more extreme.
Yeah, it was, I'm sure it was very similar. Like, oh my gosh, what is going on? So my audience might not really know as much about like pottery and what glazes are. Is there a way to kind of explain it in layman's, but maybe a little bit more than layman's terms? Like,
sure. Yeah. And the clay goes through 2 firings. The first firing is a bisque firing, and it makes it permanent, but it's not durable, and it's still a little porous. And at that point is when the glaze goes on. And the glaze is made out of material that's powdered, and it's sort of like a cookie recipe where there's multiple things that go into each glaze, and each part has a role to play. Some of the materials color it, some of the materials form a glass when they melt, and some of the materials keep that glass on the pot and keep it from running down. And they're all earth materials. They're all mined and pulverized, and they're not made for potters. They're made for industry, and we happen to use them also. So if different industries go or change, then ceramic material availability changes. It's pretty interesting because, I mean, the amount that potters use is minuscule compared to industry. So the powder is measured very carefully with a gram scale, and it's suspended in water. And so when the pot is bisque fired, you can dip it in this mixture, and because the pot is porous, it pulls the water out of the glaze and captures a coating of that material on its surface. And then it goes through a second firing, which is the firing that makes it so that the glaze fuses and melts onto the surface. And that's what creates the shine or the color or the functionality of the surface. It's a really cool. It's can be very chemistry based. Many people don't really delve too far into the chemistry part, but a little bit of that knowledge is really helpful for developing like a specific surface that you want. You can also just buy glazes commercially in a jar and not deal with mixing them, but then you're held to what the commercial glaze is. Like you can't adjust it to change with what you want as much. It's cool stuff.
Yeah. What was your first experience like? Was there a moment when you fell in love with the process?
I think there were a lot of moments, but I mean, ceramics is so, it has a lot of surprises in it. And that part of it I love. And some of those surprises are not as fun. Like, for instance, this is a small example, but a glaze in the bucket before it's been fired or applied can be sort of reddish. And then once it's fired, it can be greenish. So the shift, it's not like paint where you put it on and it is always the color that you see. So that's a kind of surprise where it can be fun or it could be not as fun, depending on the result. But I think that challenge engaged me. When I first started my undergrad, I visited a studio potter, Peter Bronze, in Alaska and saw his studio. And I was like, this is what I want to do. Just the whole like life that was present in front of me. But it was really the community that pulled me in. And they were a big part of it, or what brought me into it. And then maybe also the challenge of the material and it being tied to food. Yeah.
So the idea that it was tied to food was important to you? Or you just
like
an added bonus?
Yeah, I just felt like a way to be involved with people in a way that's just common and natural and celebratory and mundane, you know, and making art part of all of those experiences is what I love about being a potter. But I do remember rebuilding a wood kiln and firing it with some friends, and it was the first firing, and it would not get to temperature. And we stayed up for hours and hours and hours. And it's because it wasn't quite in the right adjustment yet because it was new. But I just remember thinking, this is exactly what I want to be doing. I want to be stuck with really great people figuring out challenges and having conversations and making art. And anyway, that was one of those moments, so even in the midst of it.
Wow, the community aspect of it too was really like pulled your attention.
Yeah.
Okay, so then from San Diego, you started working, right?
Yeah, when I was in school, I also worked, you know, to pay rent and stuff like that. So I worked for San Diego State University, and then I also was a tech at Mesa College.
For those who aren't familiar, like a tech job would be what kind of work?
I would say maybe it depends on what level of a tech you are. I was younger and less experienced, and so I was mostly just doing a lot of cleaning and organizing within the ceramic studio programs. So I mean, I kind of like organizing things, so it's okay, but it definitely wasn't a leadership job. It was more like what do you need done and I'll do it. You know, loading kilns, mixing glazes, organizing, cleaning.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a good stepping stone. I mean, I learned a ton doing
And then you did it kind of all over, right? You were in different areas of the country. in different schools?
Yeah, after San Diego, I moved to Pennsylvania for graduate school. I went to Penn State for 2 years. People I've talked to think about undergrad as a place where you learn how to make things and you gain skills. And then in graduate school, especially in the arts, you learn why you make things and you begin to have more conversations about ideas and some of those underneath reasons and trying to dig them up and hone in where your expression is.
Was there anyone who really had an impact on your thought process?
I would say really all the people that I interacted with at school were huge for me. My professors, Liz Quackenbush, who luckily enough is my new neighbor. She just moved across the country to Seattle. Anyway, she was amazing. Chris Daly was my other professor. He went on sabbatical for one of the years, so in my 2-year program. And I was sad about that at first, but luckily I got to work with Margaret Bowles and Nick Jorling each for a semester because of that. And it turned out to be a huge benefit for me. And also John Utgard was teaching there. So I had a slew of amazing professors. And also, again, the people I was in school with were very inspirational and helped me keep working hard and also make great work. And they were a really big part of my experience.
How big is a class? Like, it sounds like you have a pretty close relationship with your professors.
Yeah, the graduate program in ceramics, they have, when I was there in 2002 to 5, they have 5 graduate students at a time. And it's a 2-year program. So 1 year there will be 3 new people, and then next year there will be 2 new people and alternate. And then, of course, they have an undergraduate program, which has quite a few students. It was a small program, and I felt close to the people that I interacted with.
I feel like the ceramics community, it seems like encouraging and supportive, and just, it seems like a great community from all the people I've met.
I do think it's a community where, creativity is fostered and sharing of information is fostered. And it's kind of maybe part of the roots of ceramics often growing out of apprenticeship systems, where that's a traditional way of learning is by doing it with another person who's been doing it longer. But yeah, I love the community. And I mean, to me, making items that are about being used in groups often, like at the dinner table, to me often fosters that as well. There's a lot of potters who are great cooks and making food to put on a plate, like they just mesh together really well.
I love that.
And then calling all your friends for a party also meshes well, although right now it's tough.
It is a little tough now. So then what happened next?
Basically moved every year or two for 10 years. And after graduate school, I went to a residency at the Archie Bray Foundation, which is a very, very recognized organization that supports ceramic artists to further their career and their skill through studio space and funding even. So I worked there for 2 years and really honed in on a lot of those ideas I dug up in graduate school. And then also got a little more teaching experience. And I found that even if I didn't have something in common with the artist next to me in terms of how I worked with clay, that the way that they did it was so good, I still ended up learning a lot from the people around me because they were coming at it from so many different angles and with quite a bit of skill. After there, I moved to Massachusetts and I was an artist in residence at Mudflat Studios. And again, similar experience. I also taught and packing on experiences to the snowball, just making my way, trying to figure out how to get a studio. meeting more people who had galleries or making more friends in clay or even out of clay, new crowd, new lessons, more clay experience. Anyway, I did actually get a little worn out from it. Shockingly.
Yeah. Did you take a break? Or what did you do after you got worn out?
I moved again. I moved from Massachusetts to Seattle. So in 2009, I figured out I wanted to stay here. And I mean, that was, when the market fell and everything was crashing. And I mean, thankfully, I already had a studio practice kind of developed. Like I already had a few galleries and I already had a website and started social media barely. And I just kept going, stayed here.
You were talking about the different programs that you've done and how they were it sounds like very technique oriented, learning all the technical skills, which I feel like there is kind of a difference between technique and art and like soul and what it is, your message, what it is that you want to say. And that technique just kind of helps you say it in a more clean way.
Yeah. Well, I feel really lucky that I went to an undergraduate program that really focused on technique and developing skill and seeing form. And, I had a really critical in a good way undergraduate professor, like he would really tell us what he thought. And, then in San Diego, I really developed that skill with surface. And then basically after that in graduate school, really started working on what I was saying and why. And after graduate school, all of the things that I did were completely independent. There was no structure. It's just, here's a studio and a community, go. So those atmospheres, yes, maybe friends would help with technical questions, but it was really self-motivated to, further develop a body of work and further say what you're saying with color or line quality or the events that you curate, what message is coming across. So I felt like I started really technical with a great foundation, also working for potters, and then had all this kind of open space where I had some support because I didn't have to pay for a studio or buy a kiln or like the really heavy nitty gritty of being an independent artist was still held away in a good way. So I could keep experimenting, but honing in. And then when I moved to Seattle, I was just really trying to figure out how to stop moving so much and get a studio where I could dig in.
Right.
Yeah.
There's something to be said for studio space. and I think, I hate to say it because I love traveling and I love being a traveling musician, but sometimes just being in one spot and digging in. Yeah.
Yeah.
When did you realize that you were an entrepreneur? Like something you always knew? Or
it's kind of weird. Like, I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur still. I grew up in a family where my grandfather owned his business as a shoe repairman, and my dad partially owned a cabinet shop. The cabinet shop didn't end up making it, and I really saw firsthand how painful that could be. I have to say it was a pretty formative experience. And this sounds negative, but fear is a powerful motivator to be preventative toward business problems. And so I come at a lot of my business challenges with that knowledge of things don't always work out when you don't dot your I's and make sure that you have the nitty gritty stuff all lined up. Like, that's not the part that I love, but it's the part that makes it possible. I don't know. I just wanted to be autonomous and try to do things differently than maybe mainstream businesses do. Like it's more relational, it's more about creativity. I also had great role models, you know, with the potters I worked for and different people in my family kind of chasing their own path.
And then when did
Yeah.
City Studios, when was that born and how did it happen?
Well, I bought a house here in Seattle in 2013. Previous to that, I was renting a house with a one-car unheated garage, and that was my studio for 2 years. And I would say getting a down payment together for a house is one of the hardest things I've ever done. That's a lot of cups and bowls. And I mean, it felt like a community effort getting me into a house. It was crazy. So that was a big deal. That was a big change, having a space.
Yeah.
At the beginning, really, I mean, everything grew really slowly, building on top of the thing. So it's the studio that I have now is built on the career that I developed over many years. But then the building made it feel more like an organization and not just like me only. Yeah.
So when you started it, you were really just kind of looking for a studio space for yourself. And did you have this vision of what you have now, or did it kind of just evolve naturally?
Well, my vision really started with wanting a personal studio where I didn't have to haul everything I had. I mean, ceramics equipment is heavy and fragile and big also. So it's not fun moving any of it. Just having a space to have as a home base was really important, even if I was still traveling to teach constantly. And then I just more and more kept having people ask to like work with me or help, or, you know, like getting into a career as an artist is totally different than going to art school. So there's often this gap between making what you love and then taking it to the market, and doing that with in a way that you can actually believe in is even another thing. So I ended up working with emerging artists, and I really loved it. I felt like what I got from the people that I worked for. And then it did slowly evolve, you know, from that to also having a class, and then having 2 classes, and then having members, and then having workshops. And it actually got to be kind of insane for me. I'm doing this all at my house, don't forget. And then, you know, like that happened for multiple years. So I've been in this house for 8 years. It's amazing. And then COVID hit and everything just went clamp. And I've been reevaluating everything like many people, and realizing that maybe having 40 people come to my house every single week is a bit much. But yeah, that's sort of where I'm at now. Just reevaluating and really enjoying the handful of people who are coming in here on a schedule with hand sanitizer in hand.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How much of your time is spent making things, and how much of your time is spent teaching and administrative work?
Yeah. I don't have an exact number, but I definitely spend a lot more time organizing, maintaining, coordinating, chatting than making art. Yeah. I think it would be generous to say that like 35% of my time is actual art making, like hands-on clay art making. Yeah. But I've come to think of things like my website and classes and relationships with assistants as an art form, and that my life is the overall art, and trying to make sure that I have time to do other things like gardening is an art. It's an important part of what keeps me going. So.
And you guys have a garden there, and you keep bees, right?
Yeah, the house that I have, and I live here with my partner, Joe Wilkinson, who's also a ceramic sculptor. We're painting the house yellow. I mean, that's a big project, but we do have a garden. But it's about on a 1/4 acre, which for a city is a lot of space. And yeah, one of the first things I did was plant fruit trees. So there's, I don't know, 5 or 7 fruit trees that are still pretty small, but they're starting to make fruit.
What kind
and vegetables, and I have 6 beehives. I love keeping bees, and we have 2 cats. Oh yeah, we also have chickens, and it's really pretty. I mean, the environment that I live in is where I work, and for it to feel in flow and bountiful is an important part of being creative in it.
How do you think that comes out in what you create? So not only the clay that you're creating, but how does your life influence your art?
Well, it's a big question. I mean, specifically, I love to look at how the petal of a flower has tiny little dots, close into the middle, and then it's a different color as it comes out. And those kind of color shifts are things that inspire my glaze color choices, different birds, and their markings kind of combined with the signals that I see when I'm riding my bike or sitting at a traffic light. That 3-dot pattern is something that I've used quite a bit. But I think more it's that the sereneness that the garden can have makes me feel like now it's time to go work. But if the garden or my home feels jumbled, or I can see something that really needs to be fixed, then that kind of has to happen before I can feel extra space for creating more objects in the world.
Wow. I kind of think I'm the opposite.
Really?
Yeah, if I make a song, I'm like, okay, I'm ready.
Then you have energy to approach your life after that creative process. Yeah. Interesting.
Kind of like my morning coffee. Like I need to just like be at my piano for a little bit before I talk to everybody,
Yeah. But I could see that way too.
Yeah, I do need to have like my studio in order, like, and kind of I'm very into organizing and like having things kind of organized, and so that way my brain can feel clean and like there's space to create. But
yeah, there's something about tending a garden, that sort of nurturing feeling that I love, and I feel that way about a lot of things, about my studio practice or the people around me.
How do you feel when you garden, when you're working with clay? Is a similar feeling? Like what's the difference?
It kind of depends. So my studio practice can be really energetic and innovative and like really in flow. It can also be a serious discipline, and I just need to get this order filled and I can't pay my bills, and that heaviness of like, if this doesn't turn out, this bad thing is going to happen. So it can be both of those things. And so for me, getting ahead of deadlines helps that negative one not happen. But, the garden can be that too. It can be this space that feeds me. It's gorgeous. It's like I sit there and I look at it and I have a sense of awe. It can also be, holy moly, how did those weeds get so big? Some of it is just managing the timing of things, or thinking far enough ahead that I plant things that manage themselves. I mean, my goal is for it to feel, not that discipline is wrong. I actually love discipline in terms of a meditative practice. but discipline in terms of I have to do this or my life can't happen. Like that exists inside of being an artist also, for me at least, you know.
Yeah.
You must have that also. I mean, you're a working artist.
I do. I think for me, it's kind of a mental health thing. Like
Yeah.
I need it to just like feel okay, you know, and I find to feel like if I can express myself in my songs, it helps me kind of articulate how I want to express myself in my life. And it's just like, it's a huge coping mechanism for me for stress. It's just, that's really, yeah, I can definitely relate.
Yeah. I liked what you mentioned. I can't actually remember what you said, but that there being some sort of reciprocal relationship between your work as a musician and your life. And I've felt that way where, for instance, when I moved to Seattle, I was working on sets and thinking about a sense of place because I couldn't find my place in this city that was my home. And it felt weird moving back to Seattle and focusing on a shape that had this tray where it fit and it belonged. It just helped me like get my mind in a focus that way. And I think art's important for that.
Wow. I think right now with everything going on in the world, you know, I usually use my songs as kind of like an anchor, as like a mantra if you're into mantras. But like right now, this is one I've been working on the past like week. It's like slow and steady. Oh, I'm ready to let it all fall apart. You know, like that's it. Like we just gotta let it fall apart, you know? I mean, what else can you do? But I think, you know, just with race relations, with the pandemic, with, you know, kind of everything we ever thought that was is no longer, you know, and just kind of let's be real. So
Yeah. It's a lot to let fall apart. I mean, I'm a person that likes to hold on pretty tightly to how things turn out. And it's been a big struggle not planning things, for instance, in a really such a small thing. But for me, it's a big deal to basically, if somebody asks me if I could do something, I can almost without even looking say yes, which that never would have been possible before because there would have been so many things on the calendar.
yeah,
But
spontaneity is great. But you are doing a lot online. Um,
mm-hmm.
and I really would love to learn a little bit more about your workshops.
The workshops that I have taught in the past are in person, and they're at art centers or universities, so for groups of people, which does create an atmosphere that I love, you know, where people are setting aside their normal life to come and work on the creative process in clay. So I would teach, I don't know, as many as 10 or 12 of those a year when I was really working hard, and also maintaining my studio and studio practice and classes here, etc. So that changed a lot, of course, when COVID hit and every single thing that I had planned was canceled. I had a really hard time. And, you know, like these thoughts of my dad, watching him lose his house because of his business challenges. And I'm just like, this is not happening. Like, what can I do? The only thing I could think of to do was teach online. I had actually been thinking of teaching online, I don't know, for 5 years or more, but it was always too overwhelming and also undesirable because I don't like being on video very much. So I never did it. But then when the pandemic hit, that became even worse than doing video. And so I just started researching like crazy, like what platform should I use? What camera should I use? What cord do I need? What internet bandwidth do I need? On and on and on. And thankfully I had taught a ton of workshops in person. And so the content isn't hard for me, and they're going really well. And it's kind of crazy.
Okay, awesome. Wonderful. And so what else is going on? What else, how can people stay in touch, and how can we support you? And we can also look at your pottery on your website, right? Because you have some amazing.
Sure. Yep. I have a website. My website is where everything is, really. It's ratcitystudios.com. You can find my new book there under shop. You can find pottery.
My last question for you is, what does creativity mean to you?
What does creativity mean to me? I think it means to me having a generative life where you're fostering energy, objects, people, the environment, and you're doing it in a kind of problem-solving, holistic way.
Like the bees.
Yeah, like the bees. Yeah, like bees. Everything bees make is valuable. It's amazing, from the honey to the wax to the propolis to the royal jelly to pollinating all the flowers. Yeah, it's amazing.
You could really learn a lot from the bees.
Yeah, I do. I feel in awe every time I watch them zooming around.
Well, thank you so much, Deb. This was amazing. And you're such an inspiring person and artist. And it's just been such an honor to chat with you. And thanks for sharing your audience with me. I hope you guys had a good time. And I hope my audience really enjoyed learning more about you. So
thanks. Maybe I'll see you in Seattle soon.
Yes,
somehow.
I hope so. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Alrighty, bye.